All right, with that, I'll get on with the presentation. People talk about digital communications, and I have to admit, last Tuesday night on the net, it was being advertised that I was going to talk about digital communications. Well, that's not quite true. I mean, digital communications involves voice, digital voice, DMR radios, and so forth. There's Pactor, there's packet radio. It's just all kinds of different communications. What I want to talk about, however, is one specific program called WSJT-X. This stems from a request by Rebecca last March to get up and talk about FT8. And I thought, well, I could do that, but then, gee, I really got to talk about the program that FT8 is a part of. So, what is this? WSJT-X, it stands for Weak Signal Joe Taylor. Dr. Joe Taylor of Princeton, he's an astrophysicist, retired, is the guy who started this program back around the year 2000 or 2001. And he, and now there's a number of other hams involved as well. But basically what it is, it's a suite of programs that are designed for what I call minimal information exchange contacts. You know, it's for the people who want to chase wallpaper. You got to make a contact. You have to exchange a certain minimum, like your call sign and a signal report, or in the VHF contest, it's your call sign and a grid square for it to count as a valid contact. And so that's really what this whole program is all about. And when the sub-programs in this are used as designed, the communications are actually more effective than standard SSB or CW because they can operate at lower signal-to-noise ratios. The sub-program names are JT4, JT9, JT65, QRA64. There's a whole bunch of them here with all these funny-looking letters. WSJTX also contains a way to calibrate the frequency of your radio. This whole thing started back in 2001 as a meteor scatter program for those of us who like to stay up in the middle of the night and try to work VHF contacts at longer distances by bouncing signals off meteor trails. That's where it all started, but it has evolved. Gee, what is that, 17 years ago? Evolved quite a bit in that amount of time. Right now it's open source code. The main people involved are K1JT, K9AN, and G4WJS, and there's some other people. In Europe, there's some spin-off programs called like JTDX, JT65-HF, MSHV. I don't really know anything about those. I've not attempted to look into those programs, but there are people in Europe who have taken the source code, if you will, for WSJT and adapted it to do different things. Okay. Some of the sub-programs, they call them slow modes, and the reason they're called slow modes is because it may take 4 or 5 or 6 minutes to complete a CUSO. The 4 slow ones are JT4, JT9, JT65, and QRA64. I've used JT65 as the only one I've used out of that, but basically it takes 1 minute to send a 13-character message one way. So it's a very low data rate, so you can see it takes you about 4 minutes minimum to complete a contact. That is, by the time you call the other station, he calls you back, you acknowledge your receipt of his signal, and then he acknowledges your signal. There's 4 minutes, and that's if you get lucky. Those modes are designed for very weak but relatively constant propagation, like Earth-Moon-Earth communications, for example, or very weak tropo signals. And they use very narrow bandwidths in order to, that's how they get the highly effective signal-noise ratio. And some of these programs have multiple submodes. So, and I say here QRA64 is 2 meters and up only, but I found out just today that's not true. They can use it on the low, they do use it on the low bands. And if any of you are interested in any of the new loafer bands, 136 or 470 kilohertz, you can use JT65 down there as well. JT65 was quite popular at HF in 6 meters until FT8 came along, and FT8 just wiped it out because FT8 goes faster. It only takes a minute to make a CUSO instead of 4 minutes. One of the problems I used to run into on 6 is you'd hear somebody on JT65, but the band would fold before you could complete the contact. So the whisper mode, I think at one time, didn't Chris talk about this, WX5CW talk about whisper? That's a beacon mode. That's not really a CUSO mode. It was developed as a standalone program, but they have now incorporated it into this suite. Now you can still get whisper as a standalone program. I just looked it up if you're interested in playing with that. I've not done anything with it personally. FT8 is by far the most popular at both HF and VHF. I can tell you from experience, FT8 debuted in May 2017, and by June 2017, it took over 6 meters. I mean, there's not very much sideband and CW up there anymore. Well, during the contest, it wasn't too bad, but at other times, you have to tune up to 50.313 and you hear all these signals wailing away, and there's absolutely nobody down lower in the band. It's also extremely popular at HF because it only takes a minute for a CUSO. Now the so-called fast modes, MSK 144, iSCAT stands for ionospheric scatter, and JT9 fast are for some rather exotic propagation modes. Now these programs are designed, if you're into microwaves, for example, and you want to scatter signal off airplanes, you can use one of these in order to cover long distances. MSK 144 basically sends a message every 71 milliseconds. The actual transmission lasts about 15 seconds, but it repeats the data very rapidly, so even a very short meteor ping is enough to get your signal through. So now you no longer have to wait for a major meteor shower and get up at 3 a.m. in the morning to work the Perseids in order to try to make a meteor contact. All right, some general comments about this suite of programs. All of the protocols except iSCAT use forward error correction. That is, they contain bits that allow the program to correct errors in the transmission. And what that means basically is you either get the message or you don't. Very, very, very rarely do you get a corrupt message. And this is also why an FT8 transmission lasts about 13 seconds. You send one every 15 seconds. You'll see that in a few minutes. But this is why you need to get nearly the full 13 seconds of an FT8 message, because if you cut off the first couple seconds of it, it won't decode because the forward error correction will see too many errors and it won't decode it. Basically, you just use your computer sound card, and I have used the built-in sound function on a 12-year-old 1.6 gigahertz Windows laptop running XP, and I've also used newer machines, and you don't need a super duper sound card to make this work. Two things you do need are accurate frequency and time sync, and particularly time. You need really to have your computer connected to the internet so you can be running a network time program that keeps your computer clock set, because you really need like plus or minus 1 second or better accuracy in the computer clock to make this work. The other problem is short-term frequency stability in your radio. It must not drift during the transmission. And I was talking to one guy, and he was using a fairly decent radio. He was using a TS590, but people were having trouble decoding him. And he came to find out what was happening during a 1-minute JT65 transmission. The radio was heating up, and it was making the time-based oscillator drift a little bit. And he'd only drift like 6 or 7 hertz. That's too much. So your radio's got to stay put for the period of the transmission. Also, the recent versions of FT8 incorporate a VHF Contest Mode, and unfortunately that doesn't decode correctly unless both stations are using that mode. The good news is they're going to get rid of that, because the bad news in the last couple of VHF contests is approximately half the people are doing it with that mode, and the other half are using the base mode, which caused a lot of gnashing of teeth. Let's see. Oh, the other point, I just recently signed up for Logbook of the World, and Logbook of the World now recognizes FT8 as a valid mode. So if you put in your CUSOs in FT8, it will recognize it. You don't have to put it in as RTTY or digital. There are, however, no awards that I'm aware of for working, say, working 50 states on FT8. There's a digital award you can get, but I think any digital mode counts in that. Could be PSK 31 or anything else. Talk a little bit about the hardware and software. You don't really need a high-end computer. The only program that really taxes your machine is MSK 144. You do need a multi-core processor for that one. My poor old Pentium 2.4 gigahertz kind of choked when I tried to run MSK 144 on it. I just couldn't keep up. That's because the decoder is running full time in that. All these sub-programs, however, will run under XP, Windows 7, or newer. You can also get Linux and Mac versions if you prefer to do it that way. You need an audio interface between a radio and computer. However, if you're into any sort of digital communications now, like PSK 31, for example, you've got it. I mean, you could do, that's one thing, once you've got that audio interface, you can do slow scan TV, you can do radio teletype, you can do PSK 31, and you can also run this program. And you don't really need a super duper sound card either. I've been using the built-in sound function in my machines at home, just the one that's on the motherboard, nothing special. And if you want to, you could try the program out by installing it, just holding your computer microphone up next to the radio speaker. To operate, all modes basically use upper sideband. And you have it set for 2.5 kilohertz or wider bandwidth. Now I have, when the QRM gets really bad, I've used the DSP filter in my 590 to try to cut down on some of the really strong signals, but by and large, the program takes care of all that filtering for you. And there is a standard list of frequencies by mode and band, but I can tell you down the HF bands, the traffic can get really heavy. One example I'm going to show you here shortly. Well, let's see if it's, well, let's do this first. Here's how you get started. Just go ahead and download the version for whatever computer you want to use, would be it Windows, Linux, or Mac. And from that location, and while you're at it, get the user guide, which is pretty good. It'll take you a little while to wade through it, but it's well worth it. Get whatever you're going to use as an audio interface connected. You do need to have some sort of a network time program to keep your computer synchronized. I have synchronized the computer clock manually. It ain't easy to get it hacked to be within a second. And finally, just go ahead and install WSJT-X and launch it. This is what the opening screen looks like. This is actually two separate screens. The top one is called the Waterfall screen, and the bottom one is kind of where all the action is. The top one, you can see right here, for example, it's set up to 7074. That's one of the FT8 standard frequencies, upper sideband. So when you're looking at this waterfall, this edge here starts at 300 hertz. This would be 7074.3, and it goes up 3000 hertz up to 7077.3. You can change the width of that by changing bins per pixel, but I like to have it set up for about 3 kilohertz bandwidth, which is actually a little wider than my receiver is. This little caret thing up here, the green one shows where you're receiving. The red one shows where you're going to transmit. And in that particular picture, they're both at the same place. Down here is a little gauge. This is used when you set up the receive audio level in your receiver. This, by the way, the version I'm showing you here is version 1.8. There's a newer version. The screen looks different, but it's still got all the same information on it. It's just in different places. This tells you what your transmit and receive frequencies are going to be. This tells you whether you're going to transmit even, that's at 00 or 30 seconds after the minute, or odd, which is 15 and 45 seconds after the minute. The messages show up over here. And I got another example coming up here. It's going to show you a real. I'd like to be able to demonstrate this, but I figured it was too noisy in here to bring a radio. Okay, you're going to set up the program. It's really pretty straightforward. Of all the tabs up here, there's really only two you need to access. General, you put your call and your grid square in. And then the other tab is for radio control. You don't have to have your radio controlled by the computer. You can just set that to none, but then you still have to set up a way to control the transmit and receive. And I do it with a serial port over here. But then I also, since I have kind of a weird setup, I have one radio that I can control cat control, and I have one radio that I can't. For the cat controlled radio, which is a 590, I've got it set up over here to actually control the radio. It's pretty slick. If you decide you want to operate on 20 meters, you just go on the program, you click, and it tunes your radio to the right place. Okay. Equipment setup. You set up the audio levels for transmit and receive, and for receive you use that little audio gauge I showed you down there, and for transmit you should have a dummy load, but get your transmit audio set correctly. And I usually set mine up to where the ALC is just beginning to activate, so I'm running full power. If you're using an amp, be careful, because this is like teletype in a sense. It's 100% duty cycle, and some of the amps that are designed for sideband or CW will not put up with that, and you may end up with a puddle of glass. Okay, FT8. Actually, that screen I showed you is quite similar for JT9, JT65, and FT8. The only difference between the two is FT8 can automatically sequence the messages, and that's because it's operating at 15-second intervals. Things happen fast enough that it's really kind of nice to have the auto sequencing. So you just pick up WSJT-X from the mode tab, or you select the mode rather, and tune it to whatever frequency you want. Like I had 7074 up there. To answer a CQ, you just double click on the other station's CQ, and the program will automatically generate the standard message exchange and enable the transmitter. And basically FT8 will keep calling till you either get an answer, the CQer answers somebody else. I think that's kind of a cool feature. If the program detects that he's answered somebody else, it'll shut your transmitter off. Or there's a 6-minute watchdog that if you don't get an answer after 6 minutes, it'll quit. And don't be discouraged if you don't get answers. This is particularly true down in the low bands. This mode is so popular and so dense. Here's a screen sample of something I took off 40 meters. Up here in this part, this is the time. This is the signal noise ratio in dB. This is the time error between your computer clock and the other guy's clock. And it should be running, like round 0, 0.1, minus 0.1, minus 0.2, something like that. There's a guy in here that's showing a -1. His clock's a little off. And if you're off much more than a second, it won't decode. I can tell you that from experience. Down here is a little audio gauge I talked about showing the receive audio level. The top is a waterfall. This, by the way, was 40 meters one evening last February. The time is out here. You can see 22:37:15 is the time shown. Actually, I stopped the program at this point. I went back and I counted. In that 15-second interval, there were 45 different transmissions that this thing copied. So what happened is that when the interval ended, it just went and there's still another, there's 20 here, there's still another 25 that scrolled clear off the screen. Now there is a button on here you can click that will show CQs only. So the guys in green are the guys that are calling CQ. Okay? And I have clicked monitor down here. The other side is the transmit window. And this is a case back at 22:30. Remember, this was 22:37. I heard an OE3 calling CQ, so I double-clicked on his call. And I tried to call him right here. The yellow is when I'm transmitting. He didn't come back. He called CQ again. I called him again. This time he came back. And when it hears, the program hears your call, you get a red bar. And from there on out, once I double-clicked on that, it created all these messages down there. From there on out, I just sort of sat there and watched it go. As soon as he came back to me, this thing switched down to the next message, sent that. When he came back again, it switched down here and said 73, and the contact's over. So it's really let your computer do the talking. Later on, or shortly after that, I heard a EA6 calling CQ. I called him, and again, he didn't hear me right away. And this, by the way, is all with 100 watts to a vertical, so I'm not running the killer station. And there's the CUSO with him. Question?
Yeah, did you have to configure those messages at the bottom right that it's advancing through?
I'm sorry, did I?
Did you have to configure those messages?
No.
Right?
No.
So that's just standard?
As soon as you double click on him, it configures all these messages except the very last one down here where it says CQ. That one you can do something with. Like, for example, you've only got 13 characters to play with, so you can do something like down here, put CQDX, W0FY in your grid square, but that's about it. But the others are all automatically generated as soon as I clicked on the guy's call.
What's the fun in that? It's just barely enough messages to say your grid square and you've been heard.
Hey, wallpaper chasers.
No, I've done it for about 7 weeks. I got the instructions right here. They're pretty straightforward. They have a pretty good set of commands in the beginning where you put your call, grid, and all that. And as you're saying, it'll automatically generate those messages for
Right.
you by inputting it. And like I say, you just sit back and you just watch it. It'll keep pinging until it either gets you or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, the instructions are pretty straightforward. Pretty
Okay.
good.
Let me get this gentleman over here.
I have 5,000 or 6,000 CUSOs through FT8, and there's some things you need to know. Like the new version will do an RR73 and cut out one step, right? So
Yeah, I've got more coming on this. This is an older version. Do I have another question back here?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about where you set your receive and your transmit bars?
Okay, in that particular case, I called the the last one was the EA6Q, so I called him back on his frequency. You can see the receive and the transmit bars are stacked one on top of the other. So when I double clicked, it just automatically tuned both the receive and the transmit to his frequency. What you might want to do though, in fact it's a good idea, if you can find a quiet spot, like for example, over here around 2500, there's kind of a place where there's no signals. What you might want to do is put the frequency 2500 here in the TX and then check, there's a box called hold TX frequency. So you check that, and then when you transmit, you might be listening down here, but you're transmitting up here. That's really recommended if you're chasing DX, because one of the problems, I won't call it a problem exactly, but one of the things that happens with this is all frequency errors cancel. When you try to call somebody and there's 3 or 4 other stations trying to call him, you're all on exactly the same frequency. Because if your rig has a small frequency error in it, it'll look different up here, but the output frequency is still the same. And so what happens is 4 or 5 guys tries to call the DX station, nobody gets through.
And so if you pick that open space on the waterfall over your transmit frequency and you answer CQ, the WSJTX program on his side is automatically going to know.
It'll tune the receiver to the frequency of the guy that's calling CQ, but it won't tune your transmitter. You really want to learn how to do that, because especially if you're trying to chase DX with the thing. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, one thing to remember with that is you're only receiving every 15 seconds and then pausing 15 seconds while you're transmitting.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at an open space, that's the receive cycle. It does not mean it's open when you transmit, because there could be somebody that you don't even see that's on that frequency. You have to sit and listen for at least 30 seconds to see an
Right.
open space. It's like,
Well, worse yet,
you can have 2 simultaneous conversations going on at any time on any frequency.
worse yet, if you're on a band, say like 20 meters, what's open there may not be open at the other end. I mean, that's the other problem, yeah. Yeah, Julie?
All right, here's a question. All right, on Ham Radio Deluxe, where you've got that digital thing for PSK 31, and as you transmit your message, it will cross off the line to let you know it's transmitted. How do you know on this when your message is being transmitted?
There's little dots over here
Okay.
that it steps down. Like, for example, in your first call, it'll transmit this message, then it usually skips down to TX3 and finally down to TX5. So you can see it over there.
Okay.
So this is a older version of the program. This is version 1.8. I've got a picture later of the latest version of it, but it doesn't have quite this much stuff on it. That's why I wanted to preserve this one, because it's got so much good stuff on it, if you will, as to how the program works. There's also a check tab down here called North American VHF Contest, which that's the one that you were supposed to use on during the the June VHF test, and at least half of the people don't know it exists. Because what it does, it changes. Instead of sending a funny signal report, it sends your grid square. But if you're using that mode and the other guy's not, that funny signal report comes out as some really weird grid square out in the middle of the Pacific somewhere. And you get some really strange locations. Okay, this is just kind of a summary of what I was trying to talk about, what's in the window. Again, the clock error is DT, and that should be close to 0. And the green band identifies as somebody calling CQ, and yellow is your transmission, and red indicates your call. A couple tips. I was talking about this double click to set your offset frequency to match the incoming signal, but you don't always want to do that. And you can use that hold transmit frequency button to set the transmit to a quieter area in the waterfall. There also may be operation on other than the suggested frequencies. For example, on 6 meters at least, 50.313 is the common 6 meter frequency, but if you're trying to work Europe or Japan, frequently they'll go up to 323 to get away from all the stateside, and Europe apparently is even worse. Just the QRM in Europe is apparently horrible up there.
Do you think this will just people will wear out on it over time?
That's an interesting question. For the people who just want to go for rewards and so forth, probably not. I got to admit, I'm just kind of doing it for the hell of it, but truthfully, I kind of prefer standard CUSOs, you know, where you talk to people, but
I noticed on the bands, I'm seeing very little PSK 31, almost zilch, hearing zilch CW or CCW in the what do you call it, bandpass filter on SDR, or on, but I do see voice, but it doesn't seem to be as much SB as much. It seems like everybody's over here.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, that was the experience I've had both on 40 and even on 6 meters. It's just,
20 as well.
it seems like everybody's out there. All they want to do is make the contact, get credit for working a grid or something like that.
Right.
And that's basically it.
SSB is kind of, you know.
Yeah. One thing I didn't mention earlier, but you have to be a little careful with the sequencing. It's not so much on the low bands, but I know on 6, typically European ops will CQ on 00 or 30, segments starting on 00 or 30 seconds, and North America stays on the odds. And you get a lot of people mad at you if you get off sequence. Okay, this is the newer version, 1.9.1, and everything is here that was here in the earlier slide I showed you. It's just in a different place. Again, this happened to be 6 meters this past June, and I just copied a string of calls here to show you what it looked like. And the waterfall, of course, is not nearly as densely populated as it is like on 40. And where did my transmit? Oh, there I go. There I've got transmit and receive separated. Excuse me, this is transmit and that's receive. I had whole TX frequency checked to put me down in what I thought was a quiet spot. But basically, it's the same, you know, same thing. All right. There is a de-expedition mode, which I have not tried yet. I probably need to do that because I understand there's currently an expedition out that's using it. This latest version, 1.9.1, did add this new mode, and it allows the DX stations to answer multiple callers simultaneously. And theoretically, I think they can work up to 500 contacts an hour, which is, I mean, you know, I think that's optimum, but even at that, they can work a lot more than they can work on CW or sideband. And it does cost them some signal-to-noise ratio. And the exchange is simpler. From what I'm told, you really only need one transmission to confirm the contact. The bad news is you have to have rig control enabled. It won't work otherwise because it apparently retunes your radio a little bit when you go to transmit. And I haven't tried it yet, so I can't speak with any experience. I just know from reading the directions you got to have that. Okay, talk a little bit about some of the other bits in this WSJT. There's MSK 144, which lets you make meteor contacts, scheduled meteor contacts, pretty much any time, any day on 6 and 2 meters. Mornings are the best time, but that's when the meteors are densest. And it may take 10 or 20 minutes to complete a contact, but you can work somebody 1,200 miles away on 2 meters doing this. And during the showers, when you got more meteors, it can go pretty quick. The other mode is Whisper. It's kind of a neat beacon mode for testing propagation. I know Chris, WX5CW, was talking about running, I think, 100 milliwatts on 20 meters and being heard in Australia. There's a bunch of receivers scattered around the world. You can look online and see where your signal was received. And I know there's standalone versions of this program that run on the Raspberry Pi and the like. I have not tried it myself. But there's also WhisperNet. This is their screen. I just mentioned this in case anybody wants to play with it, but it is a low power mode, and it is part of the WSJT suite. Okay, coming attractions. The next version, WSJTX version 2, is due out near the end of the year. what they did, this thing has proved to be so wildly popular that a lot of people are saying, yeah, but why can't it do this? Or why can't it do that? Well, hell, we didn't think of it when we wrote it, you know. So it changes the message from 72 to 77 bits in FT8. And unfortunately, it's not going to be backwards compatible with the older versions because they did change the message. But what it's supposed to help with is it's going to add support for VHF rovers. You can put a /R after your call sign, which you cannot do with the older version. You'll be able to use it in field day, which that one kind of bothers me a little bit because to me, field day is where you ought to be using sideband or CUSO and not this, but in any event, you will be able to do field day exchanges. It also will support some European VHF contests because they like to use serial numbers or 6-character grids over there. And right now, the program can't do that. The other thing, it gets rid of the North American VHF Contest Mode, which I think is great because that means people can't screw it up anymore. And it's going to support the RIDI Roundup contest. And also better support for odd or compound call signs, you know, like VP5/ something or other, which you can't really do now because the total message you can send in FT8 MSK 144 is 13 characters. That's all you got. Okay, a few references and resources. Here's some places you can look if you want more information about this. There's another thing I got to talk about because it's called PSK Reporter. Anybody heard of that before? Okay, good. At least a few of you have seen it. What it is, you can do this with PSK 31. There's also a different one, I don't remember the name of it, for CW, where you can just go in and call CQ on CW and then look on the internet and see who heard you. Well, this is the same sort of thing except for PSK or FT8.
Is there anything for SSB?
No, that'd be a little tougher. I'm just thinking decoding the voice and all that. The CW is pretty easy. This is what their main screen looks like, and this was me this past summer. I was trying to work Japan, okay? And these little red dots are where all the receivers were located. When the dot has a number on it, that means they heard you and how long ago they heard you. Over here in JA, I got 3 hits. I didn't work anybody, damn it. but I got heard over there, and I clicked on one of them, and it told me who heard me, what my frequency was, signal noise ratio, and what he was using for an antenna. So that to me just blows my mind, you know, that I can get on the air and transmit, and a minute or two later go look on the internet, and oh yeah, look at that.
The other one's the reverse beacon, isn't that what it's called?
Yeah, RBN is the CW one, isn't it? Reverse beacon, yeah. But PSK Reporter, it'll do it for PSK 31 too, but it will also do it for FT8. And like I say, it just, if you want to test your antenna or something like that, you just get on and call CQ and then go look up at the top. You have to put in your call sign, put the band and your call sign in, and see who heard you. So I don't know, like I say, that's just absolutely fascinating to me. So that's the presentation, other than I'm going to try to run a video, if I can make this work. Where is the, come on, this thing's got, is it over here? Oh, there we go. I hope this works. I set up my camera. Okay, I guess I want to do this. Windows Media Player, and okay. I hope this works. I set up my camera to try to take a video of my computer screen while since I don't have remote, Okay, so let's see if you get it to run. It's
So VNC installed. VLC. Well, keep talking and I'll install VLC.
yeah. Chugga, chugga, chugga. Yeah, that's the actual movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize this was a club machine.
It's very slow. Oh my gosh.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
while he's working on that, can you explain about the power levels that you need to use? And the reason I ask this question is I've made a number of contacts on FT8.
Take your time.
And sometimes after I've made several contacts, I realize I'm still at 100 watts on my transmitter. And my understanding is you should be down around 25. Like, where do you know the power level at?
I typically, at HF, I typically just go ahead and run 100 watts because the competition is so heavy up there, if you will. Now, I have an FT8 17, and I've run 5 watts and made a few Qs with it, but, and you can turn the power down if you want to. I've made contacts at 25 and 30 watts as well. But I, like, for example, on 6, that JA stuff, I was running 500 watts because that's kind of what you need to get across the pond, 500 watts to a beam. But down on HF bands, you don't really have to run that much power. And it also depends, are you just trying to work stateside stuff, or are you trying to work some DX?
You know, I'm in it the same way you are, just kind of doing it for the heck of it and wanted to.
Okay.
You know, I kind of stumbled into it, but I wasn't quite sure about proper etiquette and things like that. I'm making the contacts, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. And so the presentation tonight kind of explained that I'm really doing about all that you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
The computer's doing most of the work there. But
Yeah, and it could be fun to do. And they tell you, yeah, you ought to run lower power, but I think a lot of people don't do that from what I've seen. And the problem is your radio in the program can probably handle about 70 or 80 dB SNR, and that's about all it can handle. When you get this guy that's 60 over 9, you just can't hear weak signals anymore. Even 40 over 9, it drives the weak signals into the noise, and you can't hear them. Yeah, it's kind of nice if everybody did run lower power, especially down at HF where you don't really need it, but that doesn't seem to happen.
Are you considering using an external time base for your rig?
I bought a better time base for my radio. It's a half ppm. I don't need the absolute frequency accuracy, but I do need it to stay put. So yes, sir.
Hey, this bit of with JT8, you can run, they can work like how many stations you say at one time or contacts?
This
New version or that?
this version is just one at a time. The de-expedition mode,
Right.
they can work, and I can't tell you how many exactly, but they can work more than one station at a time.
So is this how they get so many contacts in these contests? You know, you read about these expeditions that made, thousands and thousands of contacts.
No,
You try
that's
and
No,
rationalize that.
not really, because FT8, this de-expedition mode just really came about this past summer. It was really, I think, the first time.
Baker Island.
It's been out Baker Island. Yeah, it was the
Baker
first one.
Island was the first one.
So no, a lot of these guys, it's just the fact that there's people sitting in front of the radios 24 hours a day.
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, hotshot CW ops, knocking off 3 or 4 or even 5 a minute, and even on sideband, knocking off 3 or 4 a minute. That's how they're racking up all those contacts. But it's got to be tiresome after a while. It's fun, I got to admit, if you happen to be on the other end, the pile-up end, listening to all these people calling you. Back in the 60s, I was in the Navy, and I spent a year down in Guantanamo. And at the time, KG4 was a fairly rare call sign. And the station manager hated me because I'd get on the air and operate for a couple hours, and then he'd get deluged with QSL cards. But, oh well. Any luck? Oh, okay.
I don't think it's got sound, though.
No sound? Oh, okay, just hit play. All right, here goes. I hope.
So you might have to narrate it.
Well, it should have audio with it.
Make the little sounds with your mouth.
Yeah, it's going.
No, no such luck. Okay, well here, as you can see, I happen to be on 6 meters when I'm doing this. And I'm going to try to work somebody here. You can see it's every 15 seconds.
Turn it down. We're gonna try it.
Okay. Well, let's let me kill it back to here.
Fairly low.
You are.
Okay, hold on a sec. We get this back to the beginning.
Yeah. Let it play through until we find sound. Then we can reset it.
Okay.
You got it plugged in, Kyle?
I think so.
Yeah, otherwise I'll have to. Yeah, gain found audio is all the way up.
Start pantomiming.
You know, sit and go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, for those of you who haven't heard these whistling, the way this thing sounds is woo, except there's a bunch of them. All right. I was just pointing out how I'm trying to work somebody here, and you can see it. I clicked on his call, and it lit up the red transmit button right here. It also generated the messages for me over here. And there I got an answer. And from here on out, I'm just a spectator.
So you work a lot of splits? You've been doing that? I really haven't done a lot of that. That's a good idea to try that, where you take the transmit and
Yeah. If the band is really densely populated, it's a good idea to do that. Unless the guy you're working is already S9 or 20/9, then it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And also, if it's not rear DX, you know, where 14 people are going to be calling him. But most of the time, I do try to hold the transmit. And by the way, you don't have to use a waterfall. You can turn it off if you want to. I prefer to use it because then I can see where I am and where everybody else is. So I don't think so.
I hate pop-ups. They're evil. They need to go away.
Yeah. I hate these touchpads because I can never hit the right spot, Kyle. There we go. All right, well, I'm sorry the audio didn't work, but I had narrated this as I was doing it and trying to show what it looks like on the actual computer screen. So are there any other questions?
What's the 40 meter frequency? I'm gonna try to get this.
7074.
There you go.
If you happen,
Kevin is remoting into his Flex at home.
I'm sorry, was that a commercial there?
Yeah. This is a Flex, and you can remote into it.
Oh, these kids today.
yeah,
Not very loud.
not real loud, yeah. 3574 is another one on 80 if you can do. Oh, there you go. I don't know if you folks on the other side can hear that or not.
Come by and listen if you really want to hear it.
The actual transmit bandwidth required, I think, is on the order of less than 50 hertz, pretty narrow. And there's 8, it's called FT8 because there's 8 different tone frequencies used in the thing.
I heard they've been experimenting with a version of this, because right now it's just the bare bones exchange. But I'd heard there was one that they were working that, like this mode, that would permit a little bit, like in PSK 31, you can kind of build preset, like, you know, this is my rig, watts, that kind of stuff. It's very much in its infancy.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've heard about that.
I don't know if Joe Taylor's group is working on that.
Have you tried? Anybody tried that? I have not.
There may be a different group.
Well,
It's very slow. They're using, and Joe's making a change in name of Paul's
FT8 Paul.
right.
The developer sent an email out saying that Joe Taylor's wishing them to change the name of it, but it is a slow exchange, almost getting you back to JT9 or JT65.
And you're doing it so that you can use it in contest form and get credit. Whereas today in FT8, you can't really get credit on a lot of the contests.
Yeah, that's why they had the VHF contest mode for FT8, because you needed to exchange grid squares and not that stupid signal report, which, by the way, that signal report, I've written to Joe Taylor a couple of times about this and never really gotten an answer. What it's supposed to be is your signal noise ratio in a 2.5 kilohertz bandwidth. But what if there's 40 other signals in there? Is that, I don't know.
That's what I wanted to tell you earlier. There was a report, We Think Alike, that just came out. You could look it up in the past 2 days. A signal noise level of -20 in FT8
Yeah.
is truly a +6. Joe's looking at this much of the band, and when you cut it down to just the FT8 or JT65 part,
Oh, yeah. By the
it's
time,
actually-
yeah, by the time you decode it, it's higher. Sure. Sure. The whole idea of this, of all these modes, is use a very narrow bandwidth. That's why the data rate is so slow. If you go slow, you don't need much bandwidth, and you can make a real tight little filter. The only one that's not true of, by the way, is MSK 144. That's a couple kilohertz wide. But the other modes, that's how they're getting the very low signal noise ratio performance, is by making it very, very narrow band, but then that means you got to send the data really slow. I thought it was kind of miraculous, frankly, that they managed to pack 13 characters of data plus error correction information all into 71 bits. Sorry, the geek is talking again. Any other questions?
What's the program you use for your computer synchronization for time?
I used one called Dimension 4 by Thinking Man Software. However, there's another one. Just look up NTP.
They mentioned in the book, this is the guy. I have Windows running, Windows 8.1, and they recommended one that you could download.
Yeah.
I think they said Windows 10 or the latest Windows
The-
version automatically synchronizes, doesn't it?
Well, even some of the older versions do, but it's not accurate enough. You really need the separate program.
And what do they synchronize to?
Sorry.
What do they synchronize to?
This Thinking Man, this Dimension 4 gives you a choice of a whole bunch of different places. Happen to use NIST, but
GPS or
no, it's internet. It's an internet time protocol, and there's a bunch of different sites you can use. Various colleges have it. National Bureau of Standards has it. I use talk.navy.mil, I think, or something like that. But there's just a ton of different sites you can use. I had trouble with that, by the way, on that program. With that Thinking Man software on Windows 7, for some reason, it was having trouble accessing the internet. And I don't know if it was my computer or what, but I changed. So, yes, sir.
So, two things. First off, the closest time server is at Washington University. And if you go to ntp.wiscal.edu and set that in as your time server, that's local, so you're getting less network delays and trying to deal
Okay.
with. The second one is the problem with Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, for built-in time synchronization is that it only synchronizes an hour once every 2 hours, and your computer clock can actually drift pretty significantly.
Oh, yeah.
In that amount of time period, and that's why you fall out of sync. And this is another one. you were talking about your frequency drifting on your transmitter.
Right.
Your frequency in your computer drifts also as your computer heats up or you get busy with it and start doing things. So.
Oh, you mean the sample rate of the?
So if you do, I don't even remember with Windows 10. I don't think there's a capability of overriding the frequency in the sync. And that's the reason why you want to use a separate program to do NTP but everybody falls back. NTP is Network Time Protocol, and everybody who's synchronizing their clock on their computer is using NTP some way or another when it goes across the internet.
Yeah, it's just a delay time, I guess. If it only does it every couple hours, that's enough to drift off. Yes, sir.
I wanted to bring up, and this is important, most manufacturers who made antennas based it upon single sideband. Between me and a couple of friends, we've melted 3 antennas at less than 70 watts. A CH250 from Comet, MFJ antenna, and the Silver Bullet Wolf River coil. All at less than 70 watts, and they've now changed their new...
You damage the coils, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to tell people it's not
Yeah.
everybody has wires.
That's a good point. Any 100% duty cycle, some of that stuff is not really designed. In fact, I was just looking at some antenna tuners a couple of weeks ago, I think made by SGC, and I was kind of startled to find out the thing was only rated for 40 watts continuous duty, but 100 and something SSB. But if you tried to run FT8 through it, you'd probably fry it. Was that 2030 or something like that? Yeah. Sorry.
NTP is designed to be able to sync across a variety of latencies. So it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's close or far. It will synchronize correctly. And you can, if you don't have a list of NTP servers, just go to pool.ntp.org.
Okay.
And it will find ones that it thinks are a good match for.
Okay. Yeah, that Dimension 4 program actually gives you a big list of servers. Then later on, when I couldn't get that to work right on my Windows 7 machine, I just downloaded some other NTP server. It was great, man. It just installed itself, and I've never heard from it since, but it works. So I can't say anything bad about it. I wish I remember what the program was. It really worked well. Anybody else? If not, thank you very much. And this is intended to be a short demonstration video of how to make an FT8 contact, basically answering a CQ. If you want to call CQ yourself, there's a place down here on the bottom where you simply click the TX6 message button and go up here and click Enable Transmit, and you will call CQ. When somebody answers you, you click on, it'll come up as a red bar, and you'll click on that red bar to answer them, and then after that the process is automatic. In this particular case, however, I want to try to answer somebody who's calling CQ. So I just clicked on, I think I made a mistake, clicked on somebody I didn't want. No, I don't want that one either. There's a good loud signal from FM19. Let's see if I can work him. K3YBN. While we're waiting for the computer to do its thing, I'll point out a few things down here. You want to have the Auto Sequence button selected down here. That'll make the computer sequence through the messages if you get answers. The computer, when I clicked on the CQ, it did two things. It generated this series of standard messages over here, and it also enabled the transmitter. And there I got an answer. The red bar indicates that my call sign is in there, and the guy's coming back to me. So I'm now sending him a signal report. The computer is automatically sequenced down to the third message in the string. And if everything goes as planned, I should get an RRR back from him. and I'll send him a 73 and the contact is over. But notice everything is completely automated at this point. I'm not having to do anything except sit here and watch it go. So it's really simple once you get it set up to let your computer do the talking.